President Donald Trump delivered a candid assessment of his political vulnerability during a House Republican policy retreat at the Trump International Hotel in Washington, D.C., explicitly linking the outcome of the 2026 midterm elections to his own potential impeachment.
Midterms, because if we don't win the midterms, it's just going to be, they'll find a reason to impeach me. I'll get impeached. We don't impeach them. You know why? Because they're meaner than we are. We should have impeached Joe Biden for 100 different things. They are mean and smart. But fortunately for you, they have horrible policy.
Wait just a second. We have one more thing to share.
We want to say a heartfelt thank you for watching and supporting PBS News.
Without you, we simply wouldn't be able to provide the news and the information that you trust.
So thank you from everybody here at PBS News.
In remarks that diverged sharply from his typical posture of political invincibility, Trump told assembled Republican lawmakers that maintaining congressional control was essential to shielding his presidency from accountability proceedings. "You have to win the midterms," Trump stated during the closed-door session, according to multiple attendees and subsequent reporting by NBC News, Reuters, Al Jazeera, The Washington Post, and Time magazine. "Because if we fail, they will surely find a reason to impeach me. I will be impeached."
So together we had 12 months of unprecedented success in 2025, and now we're going to make history and break records with the epic midterm victory that we're going to pull off. It just doesn't seem to happen for people that win the presidency. It's an amazing phenomenon. You know, you win the presidency, and we sure as hell are having a successful presidency, I will say that. But even if it's a successful presidency, there's been nothing like what we're doing. We had a very good day 2 days ago, too. But even if it's successful, they don't win. I don't know what it is. There's something psychological, like you vote against. You can win by a lot. We won every swing state. We won the popular vote by millions. We won everything.
The admission marks a notable departure from Trump's long-standing public narrative, which has consistently emphasized his political resilience and the strength of his governing coalition. Throughout his second term, the president has routinely characterized his administration's approach as politically successful, citing electoral victories and policy achievements as evidence of broad public support. His remarks at the retreat, however, acknowledged a more precarious political reality that has been increasingly apparent in polling data and legislative dynamics. Trump specifically framed the upcoming 2026 congressional contests as a defining moment for his presidency, urging Republican legislators to remain unified behind his agenda on gender policy, health care reform, and election integrity measures. The exhortation came despite mounting evidence of public dissatisfaction with Republican governance, including a PBS News/NPR/Marist poll conducted in late 2025 that showed Democrats leading Republicans by a substantial margin on the generic congressional ballot. The retreat setting itself carried symbolic weight. Held at a property bearing the president's name, the gathering represented an attempt to consolidate Republican messaging and strategy ahead of what party operatives increasingly view as a challenging electoral cycle. Trump's decision to foreground impeachment risk in this context suggests a recognition among senior Republicans that their current governing majority may be unsustainable without significant political mobilization. Political analysts note that presidential acknowledgments of impeachment vulnerability are historically rare, particularly when addressed to members of the president's own party in formal settings. Such admissions typically indicate either genuine concern about institutional threats or strategic efforts to galvanize partisan support through appeals to existential political stakes. In Trump's case, the remarks appear to reflect both calculations, combining an assessment of Democratic legislative intentions with an effort to unify a Republican caucus that has shown occasional signs of internal friction. The president's characterization of impeachment as an inevitable consequence of electoral defeat also raises questions about his assessment of Democratic legislative strategy. By suggesting that opponents would surely find a reason to pursue removal proceedings, Trump implied that impeachment would be politically motivated rather than substantively grounded, a framing that aligns with his broader critique of congressional oversight as partisan warfare. Multiple mainstream news organizations confirmed the substance of Trump's remarks through independent sourcing, indicating that the impeachment warning was not isolated commentary, but a sustained theme of his retreat address. The consistency of this reporting across outlets with varying editorial perspectives lends credibility to the account and suggests that the president's comments were intended for broad Republican audience consumption rather than private deliberation. The political context surrounding the retreat underscores the stakes of Trump's warning. Republicans currently maintain a narrow majority in the House of Representatives, a margin that polling suggests could be vulnerable to even modest electoral shifts. The combination of this institutional fragility with the president's explicit impeachment concerns creates a pressure environment that is likely to shape both legislative strategy and campaign messaging in the months ahead. Trump's retreat remarks carry additional weight given his unique status as the only president in American history to have been impeached twice during a single term. The first impeachment, occurring in 2019, centered on allegations that Trump improperly pressured Ukrainian officials to investigate political rival Joe Biden by withholding congressionally appropriated military assistance. The second impeachment, in 2021, followed the January 6th Capitol riot, with the House charging that Trump's rhetoric and conduct incited the violent disruption of the congressional certification of electoral votes. Both proceedings resulted in Senate acquittals, with Republican senators providing sufficient votes to prevent conviction in each case. These outcomes established a pattern of partisan protection that has informed subsequent discussions of presidential accountability and has shaped the strategic calculations of both parties regarding future impeachment scenarios. The historical record of Trump's first-term impeachments provides essential context for understanding his current vulnerability assessment. House Democrats have reportedly drafted preliminary articles of impeachment addressing second-term administration actions, including aspects of a Venezuela operation and broader allegations of executive overreach. These documents have not been formally introduced, reflecting leadership calculations about timing and political feasibility, but their existence indicates sustained institutional interest in oversight mechanisms. Constitutional scholars emphasize that impeachment remains the exclusive mechanism for removing a sitting president from office. Contrary to occasional public speculation, the Supreme Court possesses no independent authority to effect presidential removal. Such action requires House impeachment followed by Senate conviction through a two-thirds supermajority vote. This procedural framework means that Democratic control of the House would be a necessary but insufficient condition for Trump's removal, with Senate composition ultimately determining whether articles of impeachment could result in actual conviction. The current Senate landscape complicates any prospective impeachment scenario. Even if Democrats were to achieve substantial gains in the 2026 midterms, reaching the 67-vote threshold required for conviction would likely require significant Republican defections, a historical rarity in an era of intense partisan polarization. Trump's retreat warning may therefore reflect concern about the political damage of impeachment proceedings themselves, rather than realistic assessment of removal probability, as the House phase of impeachment can generate sustained negative coverage and institutional disruption regardless of Senate outcome. Federal election law adds another layer of institutional constraint to the political dynamics Trump described. The president's retreat remarks reportedly included a joking reference to canceling congressional elections, a suggestion he immediately disclaimed as humorous while criticizing media characterization of the comment as authoritarian. Legal analysts confirm that federal statute explicitly prohibits presidential cancellation or postponement of congressional elections, with courts consistently affirming that election timing falls within congressional and state authority rather than executive discretion. The joking reference to election cancellation, followed by immediate retraction, nonetheless attracted critical attention from governance observers, who noted that such rhetoric, even in jest, can erode democratic norms. Trump's additional reported musings about serving beyond the constitutionally limited 2 terms amplified these concerns. Though such service would require constitutional amendment, a procedural barrier that remains politically insurmountable under current conditions. The interplay between Trump's vulnerability admission and his broader rhetorical patterns illustrates the complexity of his political positioning. While acknowledging genuine institutional risk regarding impeachment, he simultaneously advanced narratives of personal exceptionalism regarding term limits and electoral processes. This combination of defensive realism and expansive ambition characterizes much of his second-term communication strategy and presents challenges for analysts seeking to distinguish substantive political assessments from performative political theater. The empirical foundation for Trump's impeachment concerns lies in substantive electoral data that suggests a challenging environment for Republican congressional candidates. The PBS News/NPR/Marist poll, referenced in retreat reporting, showed Democrats leading Republicans by a 14-point margin, 55% to 41%, on the generic 2026 congressional ballot. This differential, measured in late 2025, represents a substantial advantage that, if sustained through the election cycle, would likely produce significant Democratic gains in the House of Representatives. Political scientists caution that generic ballot measures, while predictive of broad directional trends, do not translate directly into seat outcomes due to district-level variations in competitiveness, incumbent advantages, and demographic clustering. Nevertheless, a 14-point national edge typically correlates with majority flipping potential, particularly when the governing party holds only a narrow current advantage. Reuters reporting specifically highlighted the fragility of Republican House control, noting that the party's current majority margin could be reversed through relatively modest shifts in suburban and swing district voting patterns. These districts, many of which flipped to Democratic control during the 2018 midterms before returning to Republican representation in subsequent cycles, represent the primary battleground for 2026 House control. The concentration of competitive seats in demographically evolving suburban areas creates particular uncertainty for Republican strategists, as these regions have shown increasing Democratic trend lines in presidential and statewide contests while maintaining Republican congressional representation in several instances. The generic ballot advantage for Democrats appears driven by multiple factors, including retrospective assessment of economic conditions, evaluation of administration policy choices, and broader sentiment regarding national direction. While specific issue salience varies across voter segments, the aggregate polling suggests a public mood favorable to opposition party candidates, a typical pattern in midterm elections that historically disadvantaged the president's party. Republican strategists familiar with internal party deliberations acknowledge that the current polling environment has generated significant concern about the sustainability of House control. The narrow majority margin means that even modest underperformance in expected Republican seats could tip the balance, while the number of genuinely competitive Democratic-held seats remains limited. This asymmetry in exposure creates a defensive posture that complicates efforts to expand the playing field or pursue aggressive policy initiatives that might galvanize opposition turnout. The relationship between House control and impeachment proceedings is constitutionally direct but politically complex. A Democratic majority would possess the procedural capacity to initiate impeachment investigations and vote articles of impeachment without Republican support. This institutional power does not, however, guarantee that such proceedings would occur, or that they would follow the specific timing and substance that Trump implied in his retreat remarks. Democratic leadership would face strategic calculations regarding the political costs of impeachment proceedings, including potential backlash effects and the consumption of legislative bandwidth that might otherwise be devoted to policy achievements. Trump's decision to foreground impeachment risk in his retreat address may reflect an assessment that framing the midterms as a referendum on his personal survival will generate higher Republican turnout than alternative messaging frameworks. This personalization of congressional elections, treating House races as proxy votes on presidential retention rather than independent assessments of local candidates and conditions, represents a high-risk electoral strategy that has produced mixed results in previous cycles. The president's characterization of Democratic intentions also merits analytical scrutiny. While progressive members have indeed advanced impeachment proposals, party leadership has maintained strategic ambiguity regarding whether such proceedings would be prioritized following a potential majority acquisition. Trump's assertion that opponents would surely find a reason implies a certainty about Democratic behavior that may overstate internal party consensus on the timing and desirability of renewed impeachment efforts. The convergence of Trump's retreated mission, historical impeachment precedent, and unfavorable polling data creates a political environment of unusual institutional tension. The president's explicit acknowledgement of impeachment vulnerability, combined with his reported comments about election cancellation and extended service, raises fundamental questions about the relationship between electoral accountability and executive power in contemporary American governance. Political accountability in democratic systems traditionally operates through multiple mechanisms: electoral rejection, legislative oversight, judicial review, and informal normative constraints. The Trump presidency has tested the efficacy and resilience of each of these mechanisms, generating extensive scholarly and journalistic analysis regarding the durability of institutional guardrails under conditions of intense partisan polarization. The retreat episode contributes to this analytical framework by providing a rare instance of presidential acknowledgement that electoral outcomes carry direct personal consequences. While such connections are structurally obvious in democratic theory, elected officials who lose public support typically face professional repercussions. They are rarely articulated with the explicitness that Trump employed. This candor, whatever its strategic motivation, offers a window into the president's assessment of his own political standing that contrasts with the confident public posture he typically maintains. The broader context of Trump's second term includes multiple developments that inform the impeachment risk assessment: judicial rulings on executive authority, administrative implementation of policy initiatives, congressional oversight disputes, and public opinion dynamics have collectively created an environment in which the boundaries of acceptable presidential conduct remain contested. The accumulation of these tensions does not automatically produce impeachment proceedings, but it establishes conditions under which such proceedings become more politically conceivable than during periods of lower institutional friction. Democratic governance ultimately depends on the willingness of political actors to accept electoral outcomes and institutional constraints as legitimate, even when those outcomes and constraints prove personally disadvantageous. The president's reported joke about election cancellation, however immediately retracted, touches on this foundational expectation in ways that extend beyond the specific humor involved. Similarly, musings about extended service beyond constitutional limits, even when clearly unattainable through existing procedures, signal a conceptual orientation toward executive power that prioritizes personal retention over procedural regularity. The substantive policy agenda that Trump urged Republicans to maintain, encompassing gender policy, healthcare, and election integrity, represents additional terrain on which midterm contests will be fought. The relationship between these specific policy positions and broader electoral dynamics remains contested, with competing analyses attributing Republican polling challenges to policy substance, communication strategy, economic conditions, or demographic evolution. What is clear is that the president has chosen to frame the electoral stakes in existential personal terms rather than in policy achievement terms, suggesting a calculation that self-preservation messaging will prove more motivationally effective than substantive advocacy. For American constitutional culture, the current moment presents both stress tests and opportunities for institutional clarification. The explicitness of Trump's impeachment warning may contribute to public understanding of congressional oversight mechanisms and their political deployment, even as it potentially further polarizes perceptions of whether such mechanisms represent legitimate accountability or partisan weaponization. The historical record of two previous Trump impeachments provides concrete reference points for this debate, though the changed circumstances of a second term and different congressional compositions mean that analogical reasoning remains imperfect. The path forward from the current political configuration depends on multiple variables that resist precise prediction. the trajectory of economic conditions over the next 18 months, the emergence of unforeseen domestic or international events, the effectiveness of competing campaign strategies, and the ultimate translation of polling advantages into electoral outcomes. What the retreat episode clarifies is that the president himself perceives genuine political risk in this environment, a perception that, however strategically deployed in his remarks, reflects underlying structural conditions that will shape the remainder of his term, regardless of midterm results. The integrity of American political institutions ultimately depends not on the elimination of conflict, but on its channeling through established procedures that command broad public legitimacy. Whether the current period reinforces or erodes this institutional confidence will be determined less by any single statement or event than by the cumulative pattern of political behavior and public response over the extended duration of the second Trump presidency. The retreat admission represents one data point in this larger pattern, a moment of unusual candor that illuminates, without fully resolving, the tensions inherent in contemporary American governance.